we weren't quite sure what. I was looking at things like Le Fille de l'Eau, René Clair, or something dreamlike. Wasn't quite right. Then I was talking with this friend of mine, Alice Labadie, who was 15 at the time, the daughter of my colleague in France who distributes my films. And she's a cinephile, she was then, and we always would talk movies. And I told her, Alice, Carter and I want to score something silent, but I'm still not quite sure yet what. And she pointed her finger at me and said, Jim, you must do the Man Ray films. There's no question about it. And she was absolutely right, because Carter and I are of different generations, but we come from the same teenage inspiration in our teenage years of Dada and Surrealism, very importantly for both of us. So it was like completely made perfect sense. So we immediately, what did we get? We got the Pompidou Center gift shop DVD of the films that's all there was at the time, and we just started playing to them. So that was the genesis of it.
So then the process was you project the films, or you show the film on a screen, and you'd improvise with them?
Yeah, I think prior to that, we started watching them and sort of feeling out, how we could interact with these films. Kind of finding a pathway and then recording that pathway both through actual written maps and rehearsing and developing a kind of language that we speak along in a conversation with Man Ray. And so the boundaries are all there, but what happens within them, all of the details change from performance to performance. So we show the films in the same order, the order that you saw them tonight, which is not chronological, but made sense to us for creating something that was interesting to watch and listen to and corresponded to how we arranged the music.
And this version of the music, you recorded many versions and you chose this, or what?
No, it's different every time we play, but it's not that different. It's not improvised particularly. It's a map that we've created that we follow, so we know who's on what instrumentation when in the films. We play similar things, but it's also not set like a score. We're not reading a score. So it's not we're not winging it each time, but partly we are, because it changes each time somewhat, because we're not tied, we follow instincts. We also listen to each other. And I have to say, my greatest joy of doing this really has been, because Carter and I have made music for quite a while now, has been playing with Carter, because he's opened a lot of things for me musically. And there's a point, and we play electronics and I play electric guitar. There are moments in certain performances where we don't know who's playing what at a certain point. And it's like an elevation, it's like an ecstatic state as a musician. I don't quite know how to explain it, but it's something very I don't know, but it's been a great joy to find that with Carter, where we find a way to mesh things musically. So this score is from the Pompidou Center in Paris. We did a whole European tour last year, and we ended up doing several nights in Paris, and they made technically beautiful recordings. So that's what this score is pulled from. But they're not all that different each time, right? But they are not the same exactly either.
Yeah, there are variables that change too, like the room that we're performing in. We've performed it in theaters, maybe this size, which would be for this a sort of smaller thing, but also very large theaters, or sometimes in an unconventional, more raw space that changes the acoustics, it changes how we interact with each other. But really we're trying to get, when we are on stage, is to a point where we can just really directly respond to the films as we watch them, allow them to reveal things to us, because that's something that does change change, right? The films don't change, but our perception of them does. You notice different details. I hear something that Jim does, which inspires me to respond to that and also engage with the film. So
There are various recordings of this that already exist in addition to the one that's for sale now.
we just recorded 2 nights from the Pompidou and made a kind of version between those two. It's almost entirely from one night. One of the films we chose to use the recording from the other night just for technical reasons, really. We had the great opportunity to bring it then to producer, engineer, collaborator of ours, Randall Dunn, to mix it. And that's the mix that you heard tonight. And really tailor that also to echo what our live performance is like in some way, in that it should be somewhat immersive feeling. It should draw you into the films. That's really what we want to do. Not really make the music the forefront, but like make something that pulls you into Man Ray's world.
Yeah, Carter would always say we're just Man Ray's backing band, you know, and when we play live, we're lit very dimly, usually in blue light, and we have little monitors in front of us. But it's really the films behind us that we are trying to, you know, put a musical guide or our interpretation, or, you know, I don't know.
And in terms of, you play electric guitar, and what else? I mean, in terms of the instrumentation, what do you have available?
I play electronics, small synthesizer, going through a lot of effects, as well as an electric guitar going through a lot of effects.
Yeah, and for me the same. I'm mostly playing some synthesizers and samplers. We, again, using a lot of effects to give it space and texture that, again, becomes a variable in our performance. And then also I played drums.
Well, I have to say, there's one comparison I'd make, which is there were moments that it reminded me of the Velvet Underground live with the Warhol films, particularly the sound of John's electric viola. And just that in my head when it gets to be kind of North African. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
It's fantastic.
So we'll take that as a compliment.
Very much.
Are there questions? Yeah.
I was just wondering, of the 4 films that you saw, which are your favorites and why?
My favorite is the last one, because it's kind of the darkest one in a funny way, but more because I get to play more wild electric guitar, and I employ feedback, which is one of my favorite things. So I always enjoy playing that one. Also, Carter plays drums at some point, in other ones too, but when he starts playing drums and I get to play wild feedback type drone guitar, that's ecstatic for me. So.
For me, for a while, it was Iman Bakia. I really like that one, but it really, for me, works so well with what comes immediately after it, which is Retour à la Raison, because they serve as really counterpoints to each other.
Yeah, and Le Retour à la Raison is only the very last shot, kind of nude torso of Kiki de Montparnasse with striated light on her. All of it is not created by any kind of photographic imagery. It's photographic, but it's all abstract stuff. But I have to say too, I think L'Étoile de Mer is maybe the most beautiful of the films in a way. I love that film, but I like playing Les Mystères.
Yeah, right down here.
Hi, what were your musical influences in terms of other, sorts of genres in relation to these films?
Oh, I mean, we like all kinds of music, but there wasn't really a specific, to be really honest with you, I know it's not a great answer, but there wasn't really one specific style or something that we were trying to sound like. And we're really drawn towards psychedelic music and the extensions of that from starting from, you know, really the 60s, but also even before that, around the world, and ecstatic music. And what we tried to do with the music is create something that's enveloping, that's transportive, that's dreamlike, and also it's not subtle. We really wanted to sort of affect the audience into, you know, somewhat of a state that feels somewhat hypnotic or liminal in some way.
And by ecstatic music, you know, that's a range from Hildegard von Bingen to Terry Riley to Swans and some, you know, it's just a certain type of music that, I don't know, there's something spiritual in it in some way, and that can be drone music or master musicians of Jujuka or I don't know. The kind of things that inspire us is so wide that that's a hard thing to answer. I mean, we like underground hip hop and we like Bach, and you know, it's a pretty wide range of musical inspirations.
I heard a bit of the Swans in there for sure.
Down here?
Yeah, so did you do psychedelics while you create or after?
You're doing them right now.
So did you create like after or while?
Neither.
Oh.
I mean,
It's a cumulative thing in our systems.
Okay.
We don't need to actually, there's a great
Okay.
thing, Terence McKenna once said about DMT. He said, you know, once you get the message, hang up the phone. So we sort of follow that. We did get the message.
Yeah, right there.
When had these been presented with a score, like in Man Ray's time? Do you know? Like, had people played music with the films?
it varied. Sometimes they were presented without any music, depending on the film. They have no embedded score. Like, we didn't remove music from this. But sometimes they were presented with, you know, Man Ray as a kind of DJ playing like jazz records mostly from the time. Things like Django Reinhardt, you know, French musicians. He was living in Paris at the time. And then sometimes they were shown in theaters that had musical accompaniment, whether it's, you know, traditionally in the States, there were organ players. In France, there were often piano or quartets. And sometimes he would give some instructions, but mostly let the musicians do what inspired them. There's no composed score that's specific to it, only his notes on what he would play, you know, the records that he played, or in his biography, he talks about some of the instructions that he gave to musicians on what to play. But for that reason, it was really liberating for us, because there was no specific thing we were taking away. We, first of all, weren't taking away somebody else's work, but also there was nothing strict or definitive. We could imagine what maybe Man Ray might have found amusing today.
Yeah, way in the back in the middle, yeah.
Yeah, Jim, you're a filmmaker and music maker, and this was kind of like a visual poetry. I wonder how it inspires you to do your own work with music. Have you thought about that?
My own work as a musician.
As a filmmaker and in the same kind of visual poetry.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer. I'm not very analytical about it. It's certainly, they're all interconnected for me, and but they're very different in certain ways. Creating music, often with Carter or with other musicians, is a kind of relief for me sometimes, because as a filmmaker, I won't say a control freak, but I'm extremely detail oriented about navigating the ship of creating the film. So, and it's collaborative on every level, but I am sort of the navigator at the helm of it all. And that it's different with music, where I love, like, well, just playing this stuff with just Carter and I love listening to Carter and reacting, and then interweaving with what he's doing. And so, you know, it's different, but it's all related because it's all expression and you're trying to convey something you feel. But music, I used to be very jealous. Tom Waits is an old friend of mine, and I used to be jealous that I'd be working on a film for a year and a half, and then Tom would sit at a piano and play some beautiful thing that would then just go into the vapor, and I'd be like, oh, fuck you, Tom. You know, so beautiful a thing, so ephemeral in that way, whereas making a film, you're making art in the age of mechanical reproduction, you know? So it's a very different thing technically in a way, but in the end, you're just making a world for people to enter and like a dream, whether it's a film or music or a poem. You know, you're just trying to create a little doorway for I'm a huge fan of, my godfathers are the New York School poets, John Ashbery, Frank O'Hara, Kenneth Koch, James Schuyler, Ron Padgett, David Shapiro, who we just lost. So Frank O'Hara in 1959 wrote a little manifesto called Personism, in which he said he was having lunch with Leroy Jones, and he was in love with someone at the time, and he wanted to write a poem to them, and while he was writing the poem, he thought, I could just make a phone call, but no, I'm going to write this poem, and thus this style called Personism was born, in which whatever you create, a poem, a film, a painting, you think of it as though you're just telling it to one person, someone you love, most likely, but it's not like a pompous thing you're proclaiming to the world, So this has been my guide always. So no matter what it is, music or a film, I'm trying really to send a little kind of love letter or whatever out to someone in the world. And it's not really a specific person often, but that's the idea. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's always been my guide.
There's just time for one more, so right there.
The music was really wonderful. I loved how whenever someone would get into a car, the DC vehicle would get more rocky, and the boat sounded like a foghorn, and then the very ecstatic moments of some crowd rocky. Do you think you collaborated on music on different films? Do you think that your collaboration here was was it more inspired by the spirit of sort of the surrealist artist Dada Zomian's process?
Certainly.
Yeah, I think it was. Not in a direct way where we tried to do some, make surrealist music. I think Man Ray is endlessly inspiring. One of the techniques that he had in this film was, in his first film, Retour à la Raison, was to take 35mm strips of unexposed negative in a dark room and place objects across the top of it, expose those to light in the same way that he made photographs that he called rayographs. And that was kind of taking a technique that he already had and applying it to a different medium. I think that's something that we think about a lot, and how to stay in touch with the sort of beginner mind, and we're not as a band focused on professionalism or, like really, acrobatic musicianship. It's much more, it's a, it's a practice for us. It's a way of being free and expressing ourselves. In this case, like somewhat in the moment, we're not tied to certain structures necessarily, and neither was band writing.
Thank you both so much, thank you for that, which is wonderful.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks to our friends at Janice, IFC, Tones, for all of this tonight.
Thank you.